Not too many videos ago, I showed you all a story by the amazing Maxwell Prince, a story about the end of the world, and a story about a man who would be on a quest to get his mother the very last garden magazine before the nuclear blast would hit essentially the entire planet. And while this was a really fascinating story, and I do recommend you go watch that before this, if not just for a little bit of context. But what I'd like to show you all today, another story from that very same book, Swan Songs by Maxwell Prince, and a set of stories that would focus on the ending of everything. The ending of the end of the world, the end of the end of the world, to the ending of a prison sentence, a marriage, as well as a phobia. And overall, it really was a graphic novel that I really did enjoy, something that I can highly recommend. And out of every single one of these stories, I do think it brings something truly unique to the table. But what I'd like to show you all today is the second part of that story that I showed you a few weeks ago. And what this would happen to be is the end of the world, a new era where everything would be gone, all the plant life of the world completely turned to ash, all the buildings decimated as well as the people along with it, and a story that I also find very fascinating, because what we would actually see in the story is two people arising out of a bunker. Two people who would go on to create a garden and essentially create the Garden of Eden. And what this story does is kind of play a weird little twist on essentially the story of the birthing of Jesus Christ. Only this time in an irradiated wasteland where essentially nothing would be forgiven. But out of all this, life would be born. But anyways, everybody, I hope this is something you enjoy, as it is something that I absolutely love reading through, and once again, I would highly recommend that you go pick up Maxwell Prince's Swan Songs. And where our story would begin is at the end of the world and the beginning of a new era, as two strange people would inevitably wake up out of their bunkers. The New Bible, Genesis, Part 1. In the beginning, Adeline emerged from a bunker full of non-perishable cans and field ration MREs, and the VHS player with the box set of Little House on the Prairie and the 7 volumes of advanced level Sudoku that she'd finished months ago. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness over the surface of the deep, and the sour tang of radiation hovered in the air. Also too, in the beginning, Evan emerged from his respective bunker, which was stocked with large amounts of no-expiration liquid meal supplements and dry cereal. And of course, his Zombie Survival Guide Volume 2, and all of his zombie apocalypse novels which he grabbed in a hired rush right before the atomic clock struck 4. And the landscape, not much to speak of, pretty decimated actually, nuclear holocaust and all that. And Evan, filled with a kind of fearful awe for the blazing neon green tint of everything, heard, from behind him, a rare sound of human language. And as we cut over to our next panel, we would see this young Evan looking out over the distance, and who he would see in the green tint of the horizon would be Adeline. And at this moment inside of himself, something would tell him that this moment in time is something greater than anything that's ever happened. Because essentially at this point, these are the two humans on Earth, or at least the only two humans that they both know of. And while I do think, obviously if these two common people were able to survive a nuclear holocaust, there would obviously have to be others certainly out there, and when we get farther in the story, we will find this to be true. I think what it is that is calling inside of him is, the natural sense of survival, as well as the only sense of community left, and the only two people in the world that could manage to comfort each other. But as Evan would look over to her, and Adeline very shockingly would only say, "Did the bomb even go off?" Evan sensed the sickening panorama, the grass turned to ash, the crumbling buildings in the distance, and the absence of that ambient hum of the wind usually makes. Witness here, the first two beings of new creation, the proto-parents of this era post-eras. And from here on out, Evan and Adeline will begin to walk further, already escaping their bunkers and ready to find out what lies for them ahead, and noticing that the skylights would almost seem to be flickering, and whether this is the electricity in the air or the radiation buzzing through everything, they would begin to kind of notice all these strange and weird creatures that have never been seen before, or at least in this version. Because in the next panel, we would see Evan holding up a bird with antennae, and a creature that Evan would indeed call Bird with Antennae. And in the panel after, sighting a giant dog, which Evan would also call Dog as Big as a Sycamore. And while something like this might seem, totally terrifying to see such a creature of this stature, it only brings to mind of, you would think that two young people like this, left alone in the wasteland with basically no judgment to be had, they might come up with something a little bit more creative. But maybe therefore the lack of judgment would lead to something a little more simple. But the last creature that they would see among their journey would be a flourishing colony of cockroaches. Grubby little geniuses, this book would say. And this is obviously true. It really would seem that cockroaches can simply, survive through just about anything at this point. As we've seen on countless TikTok channels of people, deviously tormenting these creatures, and while it does seem very wrong, managing to also be very funny all at the same time. And I think that might actually be the perfect embodiment of Maxwell Prince's work. Very terrifying and very hilarious all at the same time, and on top of all this, just conveying, something that just feels wrong. But with the next set of panels, we would see Evan and Adeline walking up to a new horizon, to a place that would usher in the new life of the planet Earth, and a place where they would not only call home, but eventually come to raise a family. After some kilometers, the mother and father of Eden arrived at, well, what is it? I think it's a bunch of different stuff all melded together into like some kind of tree. And so they called it Tree. Proclaiming Tree a kind of domestic anchor, the two did venture out to see if provisions could be found, sustenance being a pretty top of the mind, and especially now that they were out of their bunkers. And this is really a part of the story that I found very interesting, as it's never really told whether this tree is an actual organic tree, or if it's just made by a bunch of different melted metals, or if it's actually made out of a bunch of melted organic creatures, alive in some cruel fashion, into some giant organism that the world has never really seen. And while the story doesn't really ever expand upon this situation, with the coming panels we would see Evan and Adeline ravaging through houses trying to find whatever they can. And with the first panel showing Evan actually finding seeds of bell peppers and corn, all sorts of different kinds of beans, as well as spades and shovels and bags of soil, Adeline would find something a little more menacing, finding butcher's knives, pickaxes, and cutlery, and with these two combining their forces, would inevitably have all the tools that they would need to not only defend themselves, but to actually begin to grow their own food. With these found objects, and miscellaneous others from other miscellaneous excursions, Adeline and Evan did make Tree their home. They didn't know each other all that well, but it seemed the natural thing to do, and who else was there anyhow? Are these pinto beans? Cannellini, I think. And with the next few panels, we would see Evan and Adeline beginning to grow their own garden, finding different patches of sowable soil and patting down the seeds with their shovels. And as they would sit and wait for all these plants to grow, for the new hope of this new world to arise, Evan would begin to read all these different zombie apocalypse novels to Adeline. And then they saw the zombie horde on the horizon, gross and hungry, and the survivors knew that they'd be in for the fight of their lives. And as these two would continue to make the best of their situation, everything would begin to grow. Marigolds, tomatoes, and summer squash, and even mushrooms began to grow as well. And in the coming days, Evan and Adeline would feel something within each other growing all the same. Evan, come look! Are those canna lily beans? Nuh-uh, they're pinto. Evan found that he adored the way Adeline's hair curled around her ears in little C's, and he imagined they were saying, "Come to me, Evan." And Adeline liked the way Evan read to her. She had never been a genre girl per se, but the novels were riveting, fast-paced and well-written, and the survival guides were full of what seemed to her to be pretty good advice where zombie invasions were concerned. Survival tip 245. If you see the horde even for a millisecond, ready your weapons immediately. Brandish your blades and your pistols, and do not let the monsters inside at any cost, because if they get too close, some might try to trick you with their backwards words. But remember survival mantra 26, be steadfast. And this sentence here about zombies kind of speaking their backwards words would be something that would come into play later towards the ending of the story, but ultimately something, that I really question, because I don't know if I've ever really seen a zombie movie where, zombies could actually talk to each other, where they could actually convey something and maybe even try to trick somebody into, letting them eat them. But nonetheless, as Evan would continue to read to Adeline, she would realize that Evan is also quite handsome, and what they would find in each other is not only the comfort of another human being in the wasteland of this brand new planet, would actually be a sprawling love. And in the next couple of panels, it would tell us that Evan and Adeline, without much else to do, would begin to start passing the time by making love under Tree. And of course, in such a world where, probably condoms aren't really a thing, the inevitable would happen, and Adeline would be forborn with child. What have we done here, Ev? What did we do? We created paradise, honey. And with the ending of this beautiful chapter and us approaching Genesis Part 2, I gotta say, I really did enjoy this first segment of the book, between Adeline and Eveline just kind of finding love in each other, as well as beginning to sow their seeds underneath this weird conglomerated tree, made up of all sorts of different items and objects, as well as organic materials. It is something that I really enjoyed, and honestly, after such a sad story that the end of the world that is, and something that you can go watch if you're confused about what I'm saying, I think this was definitely kind of a lovely little story, and something that was much needed, because right after the end of the world would happen to be the end of a marriage, and that happened to be a story, you know, that really just got to me, and it really did convey the little things that can lead to the end of a relationship, and something that I think Maxwell Prince wrote very elegantly. And honestly, every single one of these stories is something so totally unique, and something that almost always is going to be able to hit home with you, something that's going to make you go, oof, that was, you know, kind of a lot. But overall, Swan Songs is just a fantastic book, but with the next set of panels in Genesis Part 2 of our story would happen to be a group of scientists who would be also the last living creatures on Earth. About 50 or so miles from paradise, in the city center down in a basement lab surrounded on all sides by reinforced concrete, there did work 3 individuals of that old lost vocation. Scientists, Genevieve, Chris, and Lonnie. And they were about their work, a true holy undertaking. And as we cut to the next panel, we would notice one of the scientists kind of reading the radiations of the outside world, and letting everybody know around him that it should be, at this point, safe to at least go outside in hazmat suits. And while his colleagues might doubt him just a little bit, telling him that even if it is down, there's essentially nothing left alive outside, he would retaliate, letting them know that this is the point, that this is actually the point of their entire project. Because what these people will be doing is essentially sustaining a seed vault, and something that would contain all sorts of exotic animal cells, and things that they would eventually use to regrow the planet, and something that actually does exist here on Earth. And while I don't quite remember where this was, and I would like to say Alaska, I know it was definitely somewhere cold, but it is a place not unlike this, where every single seed on Earth would be stashed for future situations such as this, or any kind of, you know, life-ending situation that could possibly happen on Earth. And, you know, these things are stacking more and more throughout the decades. But with Genevieve saying this to Lonnie and Chris, they would inevitably make their way outside, on their journey to find any other living creature, and on their way to something much more familiar. Hello, world! They climbed through the silo chamber across a ladder never-ending, and did emerge into a hostile world like 3 besuited baby birds. From there, they made their way through the rubble of whatever this city used to be called. Everything was gone, except for the cockroaches, of course, and eventually arrived at the place where the land laid down flat for miles. That shape on the horizon. So they made their way to Tree. And with this being the ending of Chapter 2, we would head on our own way into Genesis Part 3, with these 3 scientists finally making their way to this giant mutated tree that would come to house Evan and Adeline, and realizing that somebody out here actually did it, actually managed to survive the apocalypse, and actually managed to grow a garden, and something totally life-sustaining, and the thing that they were hoping for the entire time. But after an afternoon of lovemaking between Evan and Adeline, Adeline would look off to the distance and see something very strange. Ev, I think I'm glimpsing something strange in the distance. I'm with you there, babe. It was, of course, the scientists from Part 2 of this 3-part Genesis. But our lovers of this new era didn't know that. The scientists trudged through the field toward Tree, Adeline and Evan's paradise coming into highest relief with each step. I think there are people living under that thing. They grew a fucking garden! Unbelievable! It's everything we ever hoped for! And they trudged on. But there was, as you might have guessed by now, a bit of a problem. Because certain people take certain books very seriously. And so Evan and Adeline scrambled to ready themselves according to the dictates of the survival guide. Both of them have internalized it via Evan's dulcet reading voice. And with the next couple of panels, the worst thing that could possibly happen in such an empty planet would eventually happen. And while it would seem that this story started on such a happy note, Maxwell Prince would do what he's always meant to do. To rip and tear any kind of hope away from us, alright? There are some Ice Cream Man stories that I've been reading as of late, and if you are here and new to this channel, well, I highly do recommend you go out and actually buy the books for yourself and take the journey into the wild ride that is the Ice Cream Man. I do have a few videos up that you can kind of see exactly what I'm talking about, but some of these later stories are just downright utterly depressing and things that I cannot wait to cover on this channel, but I figured we would actually, hit some new franchises for a little bit before we, kind of return to Hellraiser and the Ice Cream Man and things like that. But nonetheless, throughout this story, I really do love the idea that Evan's dulcet reading voice would actually persuade them to not even check on whether or not these are actual zombies. To not even check if these are the horrific noises that a monster would even make, but to just dash right to, killing them, ripping them apart, and turning them into the soil that they have spent so long to sow. But at this point, I'm sure you can tell what's going to happen. And then they saw the zombie horde on the horizon, gross and hungry. The survivors knew they'd be in the fight for their lives. Brandish your blades. Do not let any monsters in at any cost. I'm gonna try to make contact. Careful, Lonnie. They're survivors, Jen, just like us. Greetings, fellow Homo sapiens. I'm Lonnie, a scientist with the CRPNW, and we're Backwards Words, Survival Mantra 26. Be steadfast and strike quickly. And with the next couple of panels, we would see blood flying out of one of these scientists' heads as he would begin to collapse to the ground, with all these other scientists kind of screaming out in the distance, yelling, "What the fuck?" In a very funny and yet a very serious situation, Evan would only continue to annihilate every single one of these people, to absolutely decimate their bodies with whatever weapons he has in hand, and to essentially make the Earth a lot less friendly. And as the book would go on, Maxwell Prince would tell us that maybe someday we would also take this story into account, but also noting that there are also plenty other good things to read. But with the forlorn bodies of all these scientists kind of laying around, Evan and Adeline would look out to the blood-soaked grasses as one of them would continue to gurgle a phrase. Please, wait. See, I'm just like you. What did we do? Take this. It's up to you now. Make a new world. And take care of that baby. Make it new. Worlds end, and worlds begin anew. Cain slays Abel, and brother kills brother. With that, we could tell a new kind of story. Maybe someday. And this, everybody, would be the end of this absolutely amazing story, or at least something that I really found to be very entertaining and a very nice way to kind of bring back what happened at the end of the world. Because with that story, while there was a little bit of comedy, overall, I would say that the emotional feeling of that story will be mostly melancholy. But where do you think that the end of the world will be something a little more darker, only featuring a bunch of different mutated beasts, or even more so, just a complete and utter lack of life whatsoever? The end of the world is something that actually shows us a little bit of hope, that actually lets us experience love once again, and actually shows us that after something so devastating could happen, that two people could still find each other and be able to comfort one another. And it really is something that I did appreciate a lot. And overall, Swan Songs the graphic novel is something that I absolutely recommend any of you. If you're out there just kind of looking for a good read, I very much do suggest that you go out and buy this thing, as I don't know how many more stories I will actually cover out of this thing, as, just to not spoil every little bit of information of this, and to kind of give this graphic novel a little bit of a chance, because it really is something that I was very glad to actually see. And when I went out and sought after a little bit more of Maxwell Prince, I couldn't ask for anything more other than this book. Because with Maxwell Prince, when it comes to short stories, this man absolutely nails it. It doesn't matter what this guy writes, because it's always something that's going to smile or make you recoil in depression, or just give you a general sense of anxiety. And when a writing is actually able to do that to you, it's something very special. I've read a lot of bad books in my day, and I'm currently actually forcing myself to finish a bad book that you all will kind of hear of shortly. It's just something that really makes me appreciate great writers like Maxwell Prince. And I gotta say, I would absolutely love a collaboration effort between this man and James Tynion. I think these two could have a lot of fun together, and I think they could come up with a story that would absolutely blow me and us away all in the same. But anyways, everybody, I do hope you enjoyed this episode, and I really do hope that you go check out this book. And I just want to thank all of you so much for, coming back to this channel all the time and watching everything that I put out. It really means a lot to me, and it really keeps me going, alright? Every single time one of you comments down below, and I'm able to kind of have a little conversation with you and things like that, it's something that brings me so much joy, and creating this channel has just been such an experience, and we are getting so entirely close to having 2,000 subscribers. And when I started doing YouTube about 10 years ago on a different channel, I would have absolutely never thought this was something that could ever happen. But it is what it is, and it's been a very interesting ride. But anyways, everybody, I'm getting way off topic now, and I'm going to be ending the episode right here, and I just want you all to have an absolutely fantastic day. Go pick up this book. It's something you need to read, and I will see you all on the next episode of From the Heart. And I'm sorry if I look very sweaty. It is really hot in Michigan, and I'm actually sitting in front of a light with every single window closed, and it's a lot, all right? Recording up here is a lot, but I can't put an AC up here because it'll ruin the sound. But anyways, have yourself a fantastic day, everybody. Thank you so much for watching.